Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Once again, my name is Ryan Lee. I'm your host for today. I hope you are staying safe amongst the pandemic, and we have got a boatload of things going on, including my picks for this coming week's games, week 11 to be exact, as well as some of the latest news regarding the pandemic, the latest cancellations, and all of that good stuff. And also, I'm going to go back a little bit into the history books a little bit, where we're going to talk about some historic moments throughout a certain college team's program and why those events are actually really significant. Let's get right into it. But let me start off with the updates for the week regarding the pandemic. Yes, I know. Every single week, we have to go through the pandemic news. It just has to be that way because some of these matchups are actually really big. They involve a lot of top 25 schools. We actually have a grand total of 6 games postponed, which I believe is the highest amongst any of the top 25 since week 1, if I'm not mistaken. Now, here's the amazing thing. Only one game is listed as canceled. It is Ohio State versus Maryland. However, this throws a little wrench in everything because of the way that the Big Ten is formatted this year, because of the way how they already have a shortened schedule this year, and how they already are playing less games, which is throwing everything off, including the National Football Playoffs and all that good stuff. But now this is going to throw a big wrench in the Big Ten by itself, because it's not only one of the top programs in the entire conference, it is also one of the best up-and-coming programs in the entire conference in Maryland as well. The thing about some of these other games is they're just simply postponed. And the reason why the postponement is actually super significant is because of the fact that the latest NFL news have actually brought about some very interesting concepts that I think can actually help the college game so far, including some interviews and some talk that I've heard from some of the best in college football broadcasting, if I had to be honest. So the NFL has actually come up with a brand new contingency plan in the past couple of weeks. It's only a proposal, nothing's official yet, about the possibility of expanding their playoffs from 14 teams to 16 teams. Now, the NFL has already expanded their playoff to 14 teams instead of the usual 12. And now the possibility looms again of expanding that even more to 16 teams. Because something that the NFL could simply do is they get rid of the extra week in between the Pro Bowl. They just simply get rid of the extra week, which is the Pro Bowl, in between the conference championships and the Super Bowl. They have a potential week 18 to essentially have there to make up for any lost games if necessary. Or they would just simply seed by winning percentage. Now, once again, in the college football playoff, it's going to be very difficult to seed these teams based on the Selection Sunday process as well as the winning percentage, because it's going to change for all these teams. Because the thing is that mathematically speaking, most conferences have roughly no more than about 10 games scheduled. We might have as little as about 6. So let's say we have a team who goes 5-1 in only 6 games. That's an 83% winning percentage. Now, let's take the same concept. But let's say they're 8 of 9. That's 88%. kind of in the similar ballpark. But now what happens is that one team's going to make it in and one team won't, simply because of winning percentage. But one of my biggest gripes, especially towards the beginning of the year, is that once these wins start racking up, two major questions start to loom. Number one, were those wins actually high quality? Were they against quality opponents, against quality competition, and did it actually matter who they beat? You could be 7-0 versus teams who have essentially zero chance of making it to the top 25. Or you could play 4 teams who are in the top 25 and 3 other teams who are close to last place in division. One of those is clearly going to garner a little more favor than the rest, simply because of the strength of the schedule. But one team could be 7-0 facing all not so great teams. Another team could hypothetically be 5-2, having faced some really high quality teams. And let's say those 2 losses are close. Then what do? It's essentially a giant cesspool of what is there going on. Especially with the fact that 6 games have been canceled. Bama and LSU postponed. Ohio State, Maryland canceled. A&M and Tennessee postponed. Georgia, Missouri, Coastal Carolina, Troy, Auburn, Mississippi State. Those are all the matchups with top 25 teams. All of them postponed. Until when? Who knows? I do know that there has been talk of proposal of an NFL Week 18 potentially happening, which once again would push back all the conference games, all the playoffs, and they essentially just slash the Pro Bowl. Or they would just do it another time during the week. Now, how they would do this or what games they would put in Week 18, we don't know. I'm guessing it's going to be between 2 teams who had to shift the schedule around simply due to the virus concerns. And I can also argue that part of the game in this point is rolling with the punches. Being able to adjust the best you can. Being able to find a way to make it happen. Find a way to make it win. A lot of teams around the entire NFL are super banged up. As well as in the NCAA as well. A lot of teams are super banged up. But when they're banged up, what do? They don't cry about it. It's next man up. They can step up and find a way to win. I know it's a little bit iffy with this whole virus situation because of a lot of reasons. One of them easily being the fact that they don't know who's been in close contact. They don't know about incubation period. Some of these areas have some travel restrictions. Stuff like that. And I get the concern from all that. That's just the state of the world right now. But at the same time, the league or conferences or whatever you want to call them at this point should have grounds to step in and intervene and not just simply cancel all these games. But I get why. It's a health and safety concern. All of this is. So then how's the NCAA going to be able to do all this? Well, one of the reasons why it was mentioned on an episode I heard relatively recently of The Herd on Fox Sports 1, they had Joel Klatt on, who is the #1 color commentator for the Fox college football broadcasting team. And he talked about how the NCAA is not nearly as fluid as the NFL. And because of that, they're less likely to put in a Week 18 like the NFL would. Or in this case, push everything back a week if necessary. Push the college football playoffs back if necessary. If I'm not mistaken, the hotels that the NFL plans on using for the Super Bowl, they have them booked out for the entire month of February. Every single day in February is booked for the NFL because they have no idea if they have to push it back. I would highly understand and I would highly respect them if they did do that. because of the circumstances going on right now. They also talked about why the NCAA can't do the same thing. I honestly wish I had an answer. If I had to make a guess, it's because you're not just simply talking to 32 owners of the same league. However, what you are talking to is you're going to be talking to all these athletic directors of all these schools within these conferences. And with the Power 5, it's a lot of schools. Unless you want to bring in only the ones who qualify that far. Which I think is very unlikely because it shifts every week. So let's say you do it that way. You have all the athletic directors come together and take a vote. You're now dealing with dozens to borderline over 100 different athletic directors, school presidents, stuff like that, and other people who can make those types of decisions. The head coaches, the athletic directors, conference commissioners, the NCAA as a whole. The reason why it can't be done in the NCAA level, at least the way I see it, comes down simply to one thing. There's too much volume going on. In almost every single one of the Power 5 conferences, the ACC, the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12, and the Pac-12, you've got anywhere in the ballpark of a dozen to 15 schools per conference. That's a whole lot of people that need to gather their heads and talk and agree. It's a lot of people. And let's say that meeting is only amongst the teams who realistically can make it in. That's still something in the ballpark of 30-something. But once again, in college football, just like in every other sport, everything can suddenly shift all of a sudden. Especially if they go by winning percentage. We once again have no definitive answer of what the formula is going to be. We have no answer as to all these postponed games when they're going to make them all up. But all we do know is that the health concern looms and that there's a lot going on to it. And all we need to do is find out what happens, what are the next steps, and how to keep going. Also, in terms of pandemic-related news, one of the biggest positives that has come into all of this, and I don't mean positives as in a good thing, I mean positive as in positive testing. Actually, Herm Edwards, the head coach of the Arizona State Sun Devils, has actually tested positive himself, actually. And because of that, Cal versus Arizona State has been canceled as well. A big-time Pac-12 matchup along with UCLA versus Utah. So they are still trying to figure stuff out and shift things around because there's so much going on. I hope they can figure something out. I hope they can do something about it because it comes down to simply two things: clarity and ease of mind. That was the latest on the pandemic news. And coming up after the break, we have got a very interesting segment regarding a little bit of history. We're going to take a little trip back in time. All coming up right after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
here on the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Ryan Lee here once again, and I want to take things in a little bit of a different direction. Not only do we simply talk about the games that are being played, but we even talk about a lot of other things that goes on in the realm of NCAA football. Now, the thing that I'm going to talk about next, it's a little bit on the sadder side, to say the least, because I'm going to be talking about a subject that I believe is actually a very important cause and actually a very important thing to recognize. So Marshall football, they are going to honor the 50th anniversary of a plane crash that killed 75 people within the football program. So this occurred in 1970, and is that the tragedy in question here did not simply just involve the members of the football team at the time. It also included some community members and some people who were living in the area where Marshall actually is. Now, I kind of mentioned this the other day when I talked about why the Pac-12 coming back was so important. About how, not even just necessarily in college sports, but in all sports, the fact that they even exist in the first place is a very powerful tool, because they offer something to be proud of. They offer some sense of hope, optimism, something to honor and to provide some sort of positivity in a very negative setting, or in some cases a very negative time. In the case of present day, it's finding a way to provide some sort of positivity during negative circumstances. And sports has actually offered a very large vessel to provide such a platform to celebrate such things. I'm from Buffalo, New York. If you did not know, diving even deeper to that, I went to Clarence High School. It's kind of about 30 minutes north from downtown Buffalo. And an event that happened when I was a kid really took over the town a little bit. It was a plane crash that happened about 5 minutes from where I lived. 3407. It's kind of ingrained in the history of our town. About 11 years ago, 2009. And I actually remember at the time, it was really big. It was not only celebrated, I guess, but honored by some of the sports teams in the area. In this case, it was specifically the Buffalo Sabres, because it occurred in February, and the Bills didn't have a season then. And they were really the only big team who were still playing. And it was a chance for the Buffalo community, I remember, to really cope with the circumstances, to say the least. We had another such incident about 2 to 3 years ago with the Vegas Golden Knights back in 2017, when they had that mass shooting. And they actually retired the number 58 due to the 58 people who unfortunately lost their lives. And they brought on a bunch of the frontline workers who worked to either reduce the further damage or to help out the people who might have been victims and survived. I understand this is a very heavy topic, that a lot of what I've been talking about is actually a little bit dark, a little bit sad, kind of going to a place where it's not the most fun thing to talk about, but at the same time, I believe stuff like this is important to talk about. Because at the same time, this goes beyond just college football. And I said this a few weeks ago when referring to, Hurricane Katrina, the New Orleans Saints, and Hurricane Harvey, the Houston Texans, and the current couple sets of wildfires going on in California, and why that's important to have, teams like UCLA and Cal Berkeley and USC all playing. The great late legend, the Mamba himself, literally hours before the Pro Bowl. And the Pro Bowl kind of had this weird aura to it, this weird energy, this weird vibe. But what did that inspire? It inspired the entire Lakers organization to strap up and step up and win it all. Simply reading from before, I understand this is a very tough subject to talk about. I understand it's a bit of a dark subject. I understand that stuff like this is a little uncomfortable to talk about. But it's okay. If there's anything to take away from this, it is that the importance of what sports can do to not just a single person in finding a way to help them change their lives. Because you have no idea how many players go from humble beginnings to some of the greatest in their positions. It can change towns, communities, even countries. Going off of all of that, I think what the Marshall program is doing is very powerful and is actually very empowering, because they're not doing this for themselves. They're not doing this for the school. They're not doing this to the mayor or anybody in the world. This isn't for anyone specific. What they are doing is something for the community as a whole. It's a way for the community to not necessarily just remember, but to honor. And that's why stuff like this may seem minuscule, however, creates a huge impact. Maybe some people are still around and they remember hearing the news, and maybe they knew somebody who was on there. And being able to have the local football team, a top 20 program in the country right now, not only do this in respect and in honor, but in dedication as well. And sometimes in moments like this, it inspires people to continue going and to continue pushing and to continue trying. Because the thing about athletes I think is deeply underrated, and the thing that sports provides that's, I believe, deeply underrated, is it allows the space for inspiration. It's a way for a person, a family, a community to keep pushing forward and to not just carry on, to create something greater. I'm going to simply leave it at that. I am really sorry this took a really deep turn, but when I was planning this segment out, I just started thinking about how is this important? Why is this important? And then I was thinking about other things that have happened in recent memory. And literally my first thought was, this has nothing to do with present day, but everything to do with those who had to suffer because of these unfortunate events. All the people who've suffered emotionally, all the people who lost their lives, and all the people who have continued ever since to either continue the legacy or to continue and to honor. That has been my little bit about that. I hope it provides some good insight the next time you think about what sports means to you. And I hope you think about that when you think about why this industry as a whole is so important to so many people. Coming up right after the break, we've got some games to talk about. I really want to see everyone not just give it their 100% for the respective programs, but also because we have amazing things to see coming up. And for almost every single one of these programs and players, there's always a way to keep going. Stick with us.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info. Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And we're back here on the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Ryan Lee here for the final time, and we have got an absolute doozy of put your money where your mouth is. Now, the interesting thing about today's segment is that I have essentially nothing new to teach, because of the fact that I don't really think there's much else to learn. We learned about the spread, we learned about the money line, the over-unders, how to read odds formats, talked about prop betting. We've essentially gone through everything that I can possibly think of, and that is essentially necessary. So, let's get right into the games. The first game that I'm going to be reviewing today, I got a doozy of games here. The thing is that I really struggled to find intriguing matchups this weekend, because a lot of the matchups that I saw were a little bit closer to the lopsided department. However, these three games in particular, I think, were very interesting. Not necessarily because of the matchups themselves, but because of the spread they provided. And I'll get to that in a little bit. The first game we talk about is the Indiana Hoosiers sitting at number 10 in the country at 3-0, taking on the Michigan State Spartans sitting at 1-2. Now, the reason why I chose this game in particular is not because of the matchup itself, but because of the spread it provides. I think it claims this matchup is going to be a lot closer than it actually is. However, I've been watching a lot of the film on these two teams, and the thing that I have actually noticed about Michigan State so far this year, in particular, is that they are good at a very particular set of things. But the thing is that they really only exhibit it when the opposition they're up against struggles. Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan defense kind of showed that. Because things that overall, Michigan State is not a bad team. They're just kind of in this whole retool, rebuild, whatever you want to refer to it as. And then you got Indiana, who is really pushing Justin Fields and Ohio State to some sort of edge to the point where they can challenge them for the Big Ten title. Potentially. So the thing with this game is that these two teams match up not too badly, if I had to be fair. 37 points per game on offense for Indiana and 25 points allowed. Well, Michigan State, on average, only scores 20 points a game and allows 37 points per game. And the super cool thing about all this is that the fact that both the offenses and defenses are kind of similar. Both of them do not produce a lot of yards on the ground. They produce most of their yards in the air. And both of these teams tend to give up a good chunk of yards both on the air and on the ground. So in terms of total yardage, we got about 340 for Indiana versus 368 for Michigan State. Hoosiers are giving up 340. The Hoosiers are giving up 364. The Spartans are giving up 377. But the thing is that the composition of those yards gained and given up are very similar. For Indiana, that 339 comprises of 250 and 89. Air and ground. For Michigan, it's 289 and 78. So they're both very similar in that they produce a lot of yards in the air, not a lot on the ground. Defense is a very similar story. They give up a good chunk of air yards, 236 for the Hoosiers, 216 for the Spartans, and they give up quite a bit of ground yards as well. 128 on the ground for Indiana and 161 for Michigan State. However, one thing I really want to focus on is the way that these two teams play the game for the most part. Because the thing is that there's one thing that these two teams really tend to struggle with. And I think this one plays really heavily in the favor of Indiana. It is getting teams off of the field. Because the thing is that Michigan State's defense is allowing over 38% of third down conversions, which means a little over 1/3 of all drives, opponents keep on going to another drive. The same thing actually said about Iowa, about Indiana. The same can actually be said about Indiana. 35.7% of third down possibilities are given up by Indiana. But one of the big differences is that Indiana is gaining a lot more first downs than Michigan State is. It's about 4 extra first downs a game, which might not seem like a lot, but is actually pretty big. Because the way I see it, the more you can keep drives alive, the more you can continue to push down the field. And that's where you can continue to push the ball into the end zone instead of settling for field goals. It actually explains why Michael Penix so far has been so successful. 7 touchdowns, only 1 interception so far as the Indiana quarterback. And the thing is that the Tampa sophomore, he's not too shabby. I mean, yes, Penix struggled a good amount during the Penn State game. a touchdown and a pick, 52%. But since then, he's been at 60+% at the completion percentage and 3 touchdowns in each of the last 2 games. He's actually been really solid. He's been improving by the game, which is what you want to see from a quarterback. However, not the same can be said about Rocky Lombardi for the Spartans. He's actually been getting progressively worse as the game comes along. 72% completion versus Rutgers, 53% completion versus Michigan, 46% completion versus Iowa. He had 3 touchdowns, 0. So that's the thing, is that on his best days, Rocky Lombardi is pretty solid. However, the thing is that the junior quarterback really struggles to find that consistently. It's more or less of a flash in the pan. And having a form like that is not sustainable for any program to have. That is why I kind of consider Michigan State to be in this rebuilding or retooling phase. Because once they can figure something out, something a little bit closer to a long-term solution, or at least a solution that's sustainable for at least that 2 or so year stretch, it can most likely turn the fortunes for Michigan State. Tom Allen has been 1-3 ever since taking over as Indiana's coach when playing against Michigan State. However, there's a big difference here. Michigan State has had the same coach for 12 years. They had Mark D'Antonio the entire time. They do not get that this time around, because of the fact that Mark D'Antonio is no longer there. Mel Tucker provides a very different challenge for the Hoosiers. Even though this game can be played in Lansing, I don't expect any of that to change. Unless Mel Tucker is able to create something absolutely bananas to absolutely stifle Michael Penix, I don't think it's going to happen. Right now, with the way things are, Indiana's favored by -7. Which to me is essentially right where it needs to be. -7 just makes a lot of sense. It could easily be much more than that. The thing is, I can't see Michigan State pulling off with Indiana what they did to Michigan. Because the thing is, even though Indiana doesn't have the greatest defense in terms of yardage, they have a much better defense than them in terms of points per game right now. And because of that reason, along with a multitude of other things, East Lansing's going to be overtaken by the Hoosier Nation. And then we have this very interesting game in the ACC. I say it's very interesting because of the way that these two teams kind of pan out. It's Miami versus Virginia Tech. Now, Virginia Tech just recently lost to Liberty, and Miami won their last 3. The thing is, Miami and Virginia Tech both have very high-flying offenses. 34 points for Miami on offense, and 24.9 points allowed on defense for Miami. 37 points scored by Virginia Tech's offense, and they're allowing 31.5 points on defense. In terms of total yards, 443 for Miami versus 465 for Virginia Tech. However, Virginia Tech is allowing significantly more yardage. They're allowing 460 yards, while Miami is only allowing 393. I'd say if there's a matchup you absolutely need to watch for in this game, it 100% is going to be De'Aaron King versus his Virginia Tech secondary. Because De'Aaron King is gaining on average 171 yards in the air versus the Virginia Tech defense, which is allowing about 257 in the air. If Miami really wants to take a stranglehold on this game, what they really should be doing is essentially creating something where they're just going to launch it in the air. Because the thing is that De'Aaron King, he's not only a throwing threat, he's also a bit of a running threat as well. And with 16 touchdowns through 7 games, he's got a lot that he wants to prove. He wants to prove he can keep up with some of the big boys. The Trevor Lawrences, the Trey Lances, the Justin Fields. And he most certainly has done that. The one loss has been to the number one team in the country, was Clemson, and they got steamrolled. But the thing is that Virginia Tech has not been able to keep many quarterbacks at bay. And that doesn't just involve the air either. It's also in terms of getting pressure on the quarterback. Because the thing is that Virginia Tech is allowing 19 sacks in total, which currently is ranked 6th most in the ACC. Miami is only allowing 12 sacks against in the whole year so far. That is the second least in the entire conference. And one of the biggest things I think is going to play the biggest factor in favor of the Hurricanes is the way that they play on third down. Because one of the biggest things is that on offense, Miami's converting about 44% of the time. That's 5th in the ACC right now. And the thing is that Virginia Tech's offense, they're only converting 35% of the time. That's third worst in the conference. And the defense shares a very similar story. The Hurricanes' defense is only allowing 36% of third downs to be converted. That's the 4th best in the entirety of the ACC. Virginia Tech is 11th at 41%. Not only are we going to see a battle between the Air King versus the Virginia Tech secondary, but we're also going to see what these two teams can do on third down. Those third down conversion opportunities for either team is going to essentially make or break this football game. Because essentially it's going to say, are we going to keep the Hurricanes on the field? Are we going to let them keep scoring? Are we going to give them more chances to kill clock, take control of this game, and keep our offense on the sideline? Or are we able to shut it down, contain, get the ball back, and bring our offense on there? Our 37-point-per-game offense. If anything, this game is more likely than not going to be an absolute shootout. 100,000% going to be a shootout. These two teams, not super amazing when it comes to the defensive side of the ball. I can definitely see something on the offensive side really working here. The thing is that the spread is currently sitting at -2 in favor of Virginia Tech, which, honestly, I'm not 100% sure about. Because Virginia Tech has lost to some very interesting opponents. They lost to UNC, who was number 8 in the country at the time, which is nothing super crazy. They've lost to Wake Forest, who is currently sitting at 4-2. And they've also lost to Liberty, who is number 25 in the country at the time. There's a very clear pattern here where they have struggled against some of the more tougher opponents in the entire conference. And I expect that to continue with Miami coming in. And I understand it's going to be a bit of a travel here for the Hurricanes. The one thing that Virginia Tech might have had an advantage on does not exist in this game, according to the latest saying that the game is going to be mostly clear. If we were talking about some snow, maybe some rain, some colder temperatures, I'd give this one to Virginia Tech. But because everything is clear, because the Air King has been such a threat the entire year, and because of the way that they have been playing, I can most certainly see Miami +2. The final game I'm going to be talking about is going over to the Pac-12. Two teams with relatively hot starts, 1-0 each. Washington State and number 11 Oregon. So the thing is that the Cougars are a very interesting team in their first game versus Oregon State, to say the least. I didn't know what to make of Washington State. There were some moments throughout that game versus Oregon State where they looked really good, where the Cougars essentially could not be stopped, and essentially it seemed like nothing could get in their way. They were bulldozing through people, a lot of these effort plays. However, there were also some moments where they gave up some easy stuff. And what they were able to do was they allowed the Beavers to get within striking distance. And they allowed Oregon State to really get close. 38-28 is not that crazy big. But at the same time, they're playing the number 11 team in the country in the Oregon Ducks, who are really trying to figure something out with Tyler Shaw without Justin Herbert since he was drafted in the NFL. The cool thing is that CJ Verdell had a great game his first time through. 105 yards and a touchdown in the first game. And a lot of what he did were very intense, high action plays. And the cool thing too is that Oregon has a lot of weapons to work with. They have a lot of weapons to work with. That's why they put up 35, no problem against Stanford. Because of the fact that they have so many weapons to work with, that if they have to, they can run it, they can throw it long, they can do the dump-offs, they can do essentially whatever they want to. Now, so far through one game, Tanner Shaw has looked pretty good. 65% in game one. But the thing is that a lot of his throws were actually not just easy ones. Yeah, you got a dump off here, a dump off there, whatever, nothing crazy. However, he made a lot of really good throws. He was able to deliver in the breadbasket quite a number of times. I remember there was one play where there was an Oregon receiver and a Stanford corner literally tied up, and the Oregon receiver reaches out and just scoops it off the ground with his one hand. It was actually a very impressive play. And it was all set up by an amazing throw and an even better catch. Oregon is very promising. I understand why before the season started for the Pac-12, why Oregon was the heavy favorite. If I'm not mistaken, they're the highest ranked team in the Pac-12 right now. And they have every reason to be. They scored 35, and they allowed 14 versus Stanford. But one of the biggest things that really concerns me about Oregon is the fact that they allowed almost 200 yards on the ground to Stanford. But Washington State was able to run all over Oregon State. 230 yards for the Cougars on the rushing attack alone. And Oregon struggled against the rushing attack. 197 yards allowed. I think if the Cougars want to play the smart, I'm going to sound very old school by saying this, but Washington State might have to run a lot. They might even need to surpass 229. Because the thing is that if you want to combat a great offense, there's only one way you really can do it. And that is to keep them off the field as long as possible. Control time possession. One of my biggest concerns actually with Washington State is, believe it or not, Jaden DeLaura. Because he was only 55% on the air. But the thing is that he had a pretty impressive stat line. 227 for a pair of touchdowns and an interception. And the thing is, Deion McIntosh was even better. For 147 yards and a touchdown, that's really good for one game. But the question is, can they keep that through an entire another game against a team that has a stingier defense, a team with also a better offense, and a team that might be able to compete versus borderline anyone? Now, the thing is that the Ducks actually won the last game. Mario Cristobal runs a very interesting scheme. It was actually heavily scrutinized because they believe they were a little too conservative with Justin Herbert last year. Mario Cristobal, he took over in 2017. Mike Leach has been there ever since. So far, Mike Leach has had Mario Cristobal's number. So currently, it's 2-1. And the game they played last year in Oregon was decided by 2 points. So Washington State knows how to bring it to Oregon. But here's my biggest issue with this game. It's the spread. I do anticipate this being in the ballpark of the number that they gave me, which is 10.5. However, here's my big issue. Are we going to hit closer to 10? Or are we going to go over? Because what the spread is insinuating is that 10.5 in favor of Oregon means that 11 or more is the magic number here. Mike Leach versus Oregon has either beaten them or has come within a field goal. in a game where it looks like it should be 2 scores. And I think that with the way that I saw those teams play, it could be very interesting. This could be another game where we could be seeing a shootout between Tyler Shaw and Jalen DeLaura. It's another game where we could also see a lot of ground and pound, a lot of physicality, and a lot of great defense. I personally think that Oregon can easily walk through the Cougars. The Cougars can usually come right back and fight along with them. I think Washington State can make this game very interesting. I think it can come very close, but not as close as the spread says. A little part of me is saying that 10.5 is just a little bit much. Something in my head is just telling me 13-14 is a little bit closer to where we're going to be. Maybe even as much as 17, but nothing that crazy. For that, I'm actually going to take Oregon minus the 10.5, but I'm very torn. If this was minus 9.5, I will hammer Oregon 100%. 9.5, yes, I will take Oregon 100%. But the question is, it's 10.5. I can easily see this league going double digits. But the question is it going to be 10 or is it going to be 11 plus? I'm still going to take Oregon minus 10.5. But I'm very iffy about it. That has been our games for the week. I hope that you enjoyed this show. And once again, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the GSMC College Football Podcast. Make sure to leave us a review and make sure to leave your predictions and thoughts in the comments. It really helps us out. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And feel free to check us out again on the next show coming up on Wednesday. For all of us here at the GSMC Podcast Network, this has been the GSMC College Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Lee. I hope you stay safe and have a great rest of your night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.